The tall crystal towers of Zilani Prime shook as Commander Lyra watched another dot disappear from her screen. Each red light that went out meant millions of her people were gone forever. Her hands trembled as she gripped the control panel. "Commander, they've taken Calera 7, her assistant said, his blue skin turning darker with fear. "All the mining colonies are gone. The creatures are heading for our farm worlds next." Lyra closed her eyes. The Zilani people had never known war. They were traders, artists, and scientists. Their beautiful crystal cities had stood in peace for thousands of years. They built tools for learning, not fighting. Their ships carried books and art, not weapons. The enemy they faced was unlike anything in their history books. The Void Swarm looked like giant insects made of metal and flesh. They ate everything in their path, planets, people, entire civilizations. And they were hungry. "How long do we have?" Lyra asked. "Maybe 6 hours before they reach the home world," came the reply. 6 hours. Lyra thought about her children sleeping in their beds. She thought about the great libraries, the music halls, the peaceful gardens where families walked together. All of it would be gone by morning. "Send out the emergency call," she ordered. "Broadcast it everywhere. Tell the galaxy what's happening here. Maybe someone will come." Her assistant looked doubtful. "Commander, who would help us? The big empires are too far away. The military powers don't care about our small worlds." "Send it anyway," Lyra said firmly. "We have to try." The message shot out into space like a bottle thrown into an ocean. It carried their language, their fear, and their desperate hope that somewhere in the vast galaxy, someone would hear and care enough to help. Most alien governments would get the message too late. Others would read it and decide the Zilani weren't worth saving. Some wouldn't even understand what the message meant. But the signal traveled farther than Lyra could have imagined. At the very edge of known space sat a small human monitoring station called Watchdog. It was one of many secret outposts humanity had built as they slowly explored this part of the galaxy. Most aliens didn't even know humans existed. Those who had heard rumors thought they were just stories. Lieutenant Jake Miller was drinking his third cup of coffee when his computer started beeping. Strange signals weren't unusual out here, but this one was different. It was organized, desperate, and clearly asking for help. "What the hell?" Jake muttered, adjusting his equipment. The computer tried to translate the alien words, getting most of them wrong. But the meaning was clear enough. Someone was dying, and they were begging for rescue. Jake had been in space for 2 years without seeing another living soul. Now suddenly he was listening to an entire civilization crying for help. His training told him to report it and wait for orders. His conscience told him something different. "Captain Roberts to the bridge," he announced over the intercom. "Emergency situation." Captain Tom Roberts arrived looking tired. He'd been serving on frontier stations for 15 years, and very little surprised him anymore. But when Jake played the translated message, the old captain's face went pale. "They're asking for military assistance," Roberts said slowly. "They're being wiped out by something called the Void Swarm." "Sir, shouldn't we help them?" Jake asked. Roberts stared at the screen showing the signal's origin. Humans had been hiding in the shadows of this galaxy for decades, carefully avoiding contact with alien empires. They studied other species from a distance and stayed out of galactic politics. It was safer that way. But this wasn't politics. This was genocide. "Jake, how fast can you get a priority message to Fleet Command?" Roberts asked. "About 30 minutes, sir." "Do it. Tell them we have a Code 7 humanitarian crisis. Full emergency protocols." Roberts paused, knowing what he was about to unleash. "And Jake? After you send that message, start broadcasting our position to every human ship in this sector." Jake's eyes widened. "Sir, that will blow our cover. Everyone will know we're here." Roberts nodded grimly. Son, some things are more important than staying hidden. If we don't help those people, we're not the species I thought we were. As Jake worked at his console, Robert stared out the observation window at the stars. Somewhere out there, an entire civilization was about to die. They had hours, maybe less. But humanity had something most aliens didn't understand, the willingness to fight for strangers, even if it meant revealing themselves to a galaxy that might not welcome them. The emergency beacon activated, sending a signal that would wake up every human military commander within 50 light-years. For the first time in decades, humanity was about to step onto the galactic stage. And they were coming armed for war. Admiral Blake Harrison stood in the war room of humanity's most powerful warship, the Nemesis. Around him, 30 ship captains waited for orders. The holographic star map showed the Zilani system, now mostly red with enemy contacts. Colonel Amy Chen stepped forward with her intelligence report. The Void Swarm isn't just an army, she explained. They're like a disease that eats everything alive and turns it into more weapons. They've destroyed 17 Zilani worlds in 3 weeks. The room fell silent. Even hardened military officers felt sick thinking about entire planets being devoured. What do other alien militaries do against these things? Asked Captain Rob Martinez from the heavy cruiser Wolverine. They run away and hope the swarm gets bored, Chen replied. Standard galactic strategy is to retreat behind defensive lines and wait for the enemy to leave. Admiral Harrison's jaw tightened. That's not how we do things. He turned to face his captains. How long to reach their space? 18 hours if we push the engines hard, Martinez answered. All ships are loaded and ready to go. Harrison nodded. Every person in that room knew why they were different from other species. Earth wasn't a nice, peaceful planet like most alien homeworlds. It was a nightmare that tried to kill everything on it. Ice ages froze entire continents. Volcanoes blocked out the sun for years. Earthquakes split the ground open. Storms that could flatten cities happened every few months. But humans didn't just survive Earth, they conquered it. They learned to fight back against a planet that wanted them dead. While aliens evolved on safe, comfortable worlds, humans became warriors just to see another sunrise. Listen up, Harrison said to his captains. Other species think we're myths because we've stayed hidden. Today that changes. We're going to show the galaxy what happens when someone threatens innocent people in front of humans. Captain Lisa Brooks from the destroyer Phoenix raised her hand. Sir, what if this starts a war with other galactic powers? They might not like us interfering. Harrison's smile was cold as winter. Let them complain. We didn't ask permission to exist, and we're not asking permission to do what's right. He looked around the room. Earth made us into something special. We're the monsters that other monsters have nightmares about. Time to prove it. The fleet began moving within minutes. 47 human warships, each one built for one purpose, winning fights. They weren't pretty like alien ships. They looked like flying fortresses covered in weapons. Where other species used elegant energy shields and graceful curves, humans used thick armor and big guns. Meanwhile, back on Zilani Prime, things were getting worse by the hour. Commander Lyra watched her defense screens as the last orbital platforms went dark. The Void Swarm's bioships looked like giant diseased organs floating through space. They pulsed with sick light and grew new weapons from their own flesh. Commander, they're through the outer defenses, her aide reported, his voice shaking. The agricultural worlds are sending out evacuation calls. But there was nowhere to run. The swarm moved faster than civilian ships. They would catch the refugees and turn them into more bioships. Lyra thought about her own family. Her husband was an artist who painted beautiful landscapes. Her daughter was studying to become a teacher. Neither of them had ever hurt anyone in their lives. In a few hours, they would all be dead or worse, converted into living weapons for the swarm. Any response to our distress call? She asked, already knowing the answer. Nothing, Commander. Either no one received it, or no one cares. On the main screen, she could see the swarm's lead ships entering the inner system. They moved like a cloud of death, consuming everything in their path. The beautiful crystal cities that had stood for thousands of years would be gone by morning. Lyra closed her eyes and tried not to think about what her people's final hours would be like. The Zilani had never known real fear before. They had lived in peace for so long that most of them couldn't even imagine true violence. Now they would learn what it meant to face an enemy that saw them as nothing more than food. But far away, racing through the darkness of space, 47 human warships pushed their engines to the breaking point. Admiral Harrison stood on his bridge, watching the countdown timer that showed when they would arrive. 18 hours, he muttered. We'll make it in 15. Behind him, his crew worked with deadly efficiency. They had trained their whole lives for moments like this. While other species talked about peace and diplomacy, humans prepared for war. Not because they loved fighting, but because they knew that sometimes good people needed someone willing to fight for them. The Nemesis and her sister ship streaked through hyperspace, carrying the fury of a species that had been forged in Earth's fires. The Void Swarm had never faced anything like them before. They were about to learn why humans were called Deathworlders, and why the galaxy's worst nightmares came from the third planet around an ordinary yellow star. The human fleet appeared at the edge of Zilani space like a pack of metal wolves dropping from the night sky. Admiral Blake Harrison watched from the bridge of the Nemesis as his 47 warships spread out in attack formation. Unlike the smooth, artistic ships that most aliens built, human vessels looked exactly like what they were, machines designed for killing. Tactical report, Harrison ordered. Lieutenant Amy Foster checked her screens. 37 enemy bioships moving toward the fourth planet, sir. The Zilani homeworld. Looks like we made it just in time. Harrison nodded grimly. Through the main view screen, he could see the Void Swarm's ships in the distance. They looked like diseased organs floating in space, covered in pulsing veins and growing weapons from their own flesh. It was disgusting, but Harrison had seen worse things during humanity's expansion into space. Sir, we're getting a transmission from the planet, Foster reported. They want to know who we are. Put them through, Harrison said, settling back in his command chair. The communication link opened, and suddenly Harrison's face appeared on screens throughout the Zilani command center. The alien technicians jumped back in fear. They had never seen a human before, and the sight was terrifying. Humans were bigger than most galactic species, with thick muscle and bone designed to survive on a deadly planet. But it was their eyes that truly frightened other races. Human eyes were the eyes of a predator, sharp, focused, and completely without mercy when facing an enemy. This is Admiral Blake Harrison of the Terran Federation Fleet, he announced in a calm, steady voice. We received your distress call. We're here to help. On Zilani Prime, Commander Lyra stared at the screen in shock. The creature looking back at her was unlike anything in her species' history. Where Zilani were thin and graceful, this human was built like a weapon. His voice carried the confidence of someone who had never lost a fight. Admiral, Lyra managed to say, we didn't know humans actually existed. The other species said you were just stories. Harrison's smile was cold. We prefer it that way. Makes it easier to surprise our enemies. Around the Zilani system, the human fleet moved with deadly precision. Each ship knew exactly where to go without being told. They spread out like hunters surrounding prey, cutting off the Void Swarm's escape routes. Commander, Lyra's aide whispered, his voice shaking, look at their weapon readings. Each of those ships has enough firepower to destroy our entire homeworld. Lyra felt ice in her veins. They had called for help, but what had answered their call? These humans looked more dangerous than the Void Swarm. At least the swarm was predictable, they just ate everything. But these creatures, who knew what they really wanted? Admiral Harrison, Lyra said carefully, thank you for responding to our call. But we must ask, what do you want in return for your help? Harrison looked surprised by the question. Want? We want to stop those things from eating your people. That's it. But surely you expect payment, or territory, or... Lady, where I come from, you don't charge people for doing the right thing, Harrison interrupted. Your people are in danger. We're going to fix that. End of discussion. The human fleet continued their deployment, and Lyra realized something that made her even more afraid. These ships weren't moving like a normal military force. They were moving like predators who had found wounded prey. Fast, silent, and absolutely deadly. All Zalani vessels, pull back to minimum safe distance, Harrison ordered over the open channel. We're about to engage the enemy, and you don't want to be anywhere near this fight. Admiral, what are you going to do? Lyra asked. Harrison's grin was the most terrifying thing she had ever seen. We're going to remind the galaxy why every monster in the universe checks under their bed for humans before they go to sleep. Captain Rob Martinez from the Wolverine came on the comm. Admiral, all ships report ready for combat. The boys are excited, it's been too long since we had a good fight. Roger that, Rob. Remember people, we're not just fighting for ourselves today. We're fighting for people who never hurt anyone, who just wanted to live in peace. Show these parasites what happens when they mess with the innocent. Across the human fleet, weapon systems came online with deadly hums. The Void Swarm had spent weeks terrorizing helpless civilians. They were used to victims who couldn't fight back. They were about to learn the difference between hunting sheep and facing wolves. Lieutenant Foster looked up from her console. Sir, the swarm ships are changing course. I think they've noticed us. Good, Harrison replied. I'd hate for this to be too easy. The space around Zalani Prime was about to become a battlefield. On one side, biomechanical monsters that had devoured 17 worlds. On the other, a species that had clawed its way to the top of the food chain on the most dangerous planet in the galaxy. The Zalani watched in terror and hope as two nightmares prepared to destroy each other. They had no idea which side they should be more afraid of. The battle started the way humans always fought, fast, brutal, and without mercy. Admiral Blake Harrison didn't waste time with fancy tactics or long speeches. He simply pointed at the enemy and said one word, fire. The Nemesis opened up with every weapon it had. Massive energy beams cut through space like swords of light, slicing the nearest bioship in half. The creature's organic hull split open, spilling its guts into the vacuum of space. Target their brain centers, Harrison ordered, his voice calm as if he was ordering coffee. Cut off the head and the body dies. Captain Rob Martinez on the Wolverine was already moving. His ship fired a spread of kinetic torpedoes, solid metal slugs moving at incredible speed. The Void Swarm's bioships had evolved armor that could deflect energy weapons, but they had never faced chunks of metal traveling at a quarter the speed of light. The first torpedo punched through a bioship's hull like it was made of paper. The second one hit the ship's power center, causing it to explode in a ball of green fire. The third torpedo hit another ship before it could even react. 3 down, Martinez reported with satisfaction. These things aren't so tough after all. But what happened next shocked the watching Zalani even more than the firepower. As several bioships tried to retreat, dozens of small human craft swarmed after them. These assault boats were barely bigger than shuttles, but they moved like angry wasps. They're chasing them, Commander Lyra whispered, watching her screen in disbelief. The big ships could destroy them from a distance, but the humans are following them. The assault boats caught up to the fleeing bioships and attached themselves to their hulls like parasites. Then they began cutting through the organic armor with plasma torches, carving holes big enough for soldiers to climb through. By the crystal gods, Lyra's aide breathed, they're boarding the enemy ships. In the middle of space. While people are shooting at them. Inside Bioship 7, Master Sergeant Tony Rodriguez led his Marines through the breach they had cut in the hull. The ship's interior looked like the inside of a giant stomach, with walls that pulsed and floors that squished under their boots. It was disgusting, but Rodriguez had seen worse things during humanity's expansion into space. Contact front, called Corporal Jessica Chen, her rifle chattering as she laid down covering fire. 3 bogies coming down the main corridor. The swarm's warrior forms were nightmare creatures designed to terrorize other species. They had claws like swords, teeth like razors, and acid for blood. They had never met an enemy that didn't run away screaming when they appeared. But humans weren't like other species. When Rodriguez saw the approaching monsters, he actually smiled. Finally, some exercise, he said, drawing his combat knife. Boys, looks like we get to do this the fun way. The warrior forms charged, expecting their enemies to panic and flee. Instead, they found themselves facing creatures that had evolved to hunt saber-toothed tigers and fight each other for fun. The first monster leaped at Rodriguez, claws extended. The sergeant sidestepped, grabbed the creature by its throat, and drove his knife into its brain with practiced efficiency. "These things are supposed to be scary?" asked Private Mike Johnson, finishing off another warrior form with his rifle. "My little sister hits harder than this." Throughout the bioship, human marines moved with deadly purpose. They had trained for boarding actions on hostile ships since they were children. While other species preferred to fight from a safe distance, humans actually enjoyed getting up close and personal with their enemies. "Command center secured," Rodriguez reported 10 minutes later. "Planting charges now." One by one, the swarm's bioships went dark as human boarding parties either seized control or blew them up from the inside. The creatures that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries were learning what it meant to face a species that considered violence an art form. The few remaining bioships tried to flee, but they found their escape routes blocked. Human destroyers had moved into position with impossible speed, cutting off every avenue of retreat. "Where do you think you're going?" Captain Lisa Brooks asked from the bridge of the Phoenix. Her ship's weapons locked onto the largest remaining bioship. "Nobody leaves until we're done with you." The final bioship tried to ram her vessel in desperation. Brooks just laughed and fired everything she had. The enemy ship disintegrated under the assault, its remains scattering across the solar system. In less than 2 hours, the void swarm that had spent weeks devouring the Zalani colonies was nothing but floating debris. The human fleet regrouped around Zalani Prime, their weapons finally powering down. Commander Lyra stared at her screens in shock. The nightmare that had haunted her people's dreams was over. These strange creatures called humans had destroyed in hours what her people couldn't even slow down. "Admiral Harrison," she transmitted, how did you do that?" The swarm had conquered 17 worlds. Harrison's image appeared on her screen, and for the first time, his smile looked almost gentle. "Commander, those things were bullies. They were used to picking on people who couldn't fight back. They just met someone who fights back harder." The galaxy was about to learn that there were worse things in the universe than the void swarm. There were humans. And humans didn't like bullies. In less than 4 hours, the nightmare was over. The void swarm that had spent weeks eating entire worlds was now nothing but floating scrap metal and dead flesh drifting through space. The human fleet pulled back into defensive formation around Zalani Prime, their weapons finally going silent. Admiral Blake Harrison appeared as a hologram in the Zalani Command Center. Commander Lyra and her staff stood perfectly still, afraid to move. They weren't sure if they were looking at their rescuer or their new master. "The enemy has been eliminated," Harrison reported in his calm, steady voice. "We're sending our science teams to study what's left of their ships. The information should help your people prepare if something like this happens again." Lyra found the courage to speak, though her voice shook. "Admiral Harrison, your people fight like nothing we've ever seen. Are you going to take over our worlds now?" Harrison looked genuinely confused by the question. He tilted his head like someone had just asked him why the sky was blue. "Take over?" "Commander, you called for help. We came to help. That's what neighbors do." But your ships, Lyra said, gesturing at her tactical screens, your weapons, you could destroy our entire civilization in an afternoon. That's exactly why we won't, said Captain Lisa Brooks, joining the conversation from her destroyer. Real strength isn't about hurting people who can't fight back. We learned that lesson the hard way back on Earth. Harrison nodded. We had plenty of wars on our homeworld. Fought each other for thousands of years before we figured out that the strongest person in the room doesn't have to be the meanest person in the room. Commander Lyra felt some of her fear melting away. These creatures looked terrifying, but their words carried a strange kind of wisdom. They had the power to conquer the galaxy, but they seemed more interested in protecting it. What do you want from us? She asked. Nothing you wouldn't want to give, Harrison replied. The Terran Federation would like to offer you a defense treaty. We'll put a small monitoring station at the edge of your system. If anyone threatens you, we respond immediately. In exchange, we hope for friendly relations and maybe some cultural exchange. Lyra's aide whispered urgently, Commander, this could be a trap. They could be lying. But Lyra looked into Harrison's eyes and saw something that reminded her of her own father, a protector who fought not because he enjoyed it, but because it was necessary. What kind of cultural exchange? Captain Rob Martinez from the Wolverine spoke up. Well, my wife loves alien art. She'd probably trade half our ship's supplies for some of those crystal sculptures you make. For the first time in weeks, Lyra almost smiled. These terrifying warriors were talking about their wives and art collections. They seemed so normal. There's something else you need to know, Harrison said, his voice becoming serious again. Word of this battle is going to spread across the galaxy. Other species will hear that humans are real, not just myths. Some will want to be your friends because they know we protect you. Others might try to hurt you because they're afraid of us. We understand, Lyra replied. But we also understand what would have happened if you hadn't come. The Zalani Collective accepts your offer, Admiral Harrison. Harrison's stern face broke into a genuine smile. Welcome to the neighborhood, Commander. As the human fleet began setting up their monitoring station, Lyra watched through her office window. The ships moved with practiced efficiency, but she noticed something interesting. They weren't taking strategic positions to control the system. They were positioning themselves to defend it. Her aide approached with a data pad. Commander, we're receiving messages from across the galaxy. News of the battle is spreading faster than we expected. What kind of messages? Some are congratulations from species we've never heard of. Others are less friendly. The Hegemony Council is demanding to know why we didn't inform them before summoning the Deathworlders. Lyra looked back at the human ships. They had saved her people without asking for anything in return except friendship. Now they were offering to stand between the Zalani and anyone who might threaten them. Send a message to the Hegemony Council, she ordered. Tell them the Zalani Collective makes its own decisions about who to call friends. Across the galaxy, deep space sensors had recorded the energy signatures of the battle. Military analysts stared at their screens in disbelief. The readings showed weapon power levels that shouldn't have been possible from ships that size. On a dozen different worlds, alien military commanders pulled up old files marked with words like myth, legend, and unconfirmed reports. The files contained scattered rumors about a species from a death world, creatures so dangerous that they made other predators look tame. The rumors weren't myths anymore. In the depths of space, automated monitoring stations began updating their databases. Species, human. Threat level, extreme. Status, active. Location, Zalani system and expanding. But there was another notation that confused many alien intelligence officers. Under hostile actions toward civilians, the database showed a single word, none. The galaxy was about to learn something that would change everything. The most dangerous species in known space didn't conquer or enslave. They protected. They answered calls for help from people they'd never met. They fought not for territory or resources, but for the simple idea that innocent people deserved to live in peace. The age of human isolation was ending. And for species like the Zilani, that was the best news they'd ever received. For others who had built their power on bullying the weak, it was their worst nightmare come true. The Deathworlders were no longer hiding. And they had very strong opinions about bullies.